Things should work, regardless of where you are now. Written by Kelvin W. Nathan. Published by Audiobooks Office. Introduction. We live in a world that glorifies arrival, milestones, metrics, before and after stories that dazzle, where after seems to mean everything is finally working, finally flowing, finally valid, and so we wait. For the promotion, the healing, the perfect timing, the right conditions. We wait to feel chosen, empowered, or even worthy of wanting more. But this book isn't about waiting. It's about understanding something so radically simple that most people miss it. Things should work for you, not just one day, but right now, exactly where you are. Not where you think you should be, not where others expect you to be, but where your feet are planted, your soul is aching, and your dreams are whispering louder than your doubt. That's the place from which transformation begins, not the polished peak, but the real, raw present. Because the universe doesn't delay abundance until your life is cleaned up and photogenic. It responds to movement, belief, and decision. It responds to you, as you are. We've all been conditioned to believe in scarcity without even knowing it. That there's not enough time, not enough opportunity, not enough support, and most dangerously, not enough within us. And so we scramble to become enough by changing our circumstances instead of shifting our consciousness. We hustle for peace, chase love, perform worthiness. But here's the truth that changed my life, and the one I'll remind you of until it's tattooed into your spirit. Abundance is not a reward, it's a relationship. That relationship doesn't start after you've fixed everything. It begins the moment you stop believing your current reality disqualifies you from progress, joy, or miracles. You are not broken, behind, or lost. You are becoming, and things can start working for you. Not in some far-off future, but within the life you already have. You're not stuck because you're weak. You're likely stuck because you're operating under a framework that says you need more time, money, healing, or confidence to move forward. But what if the breakthrough isn't waiting down the road? What if it's waiting for you to realize you're allowed to win from here? Not just survive, not just work on yourself, but actually feel momentum, taste alignment, and touch success right here in the now. That's the shift. Not someday, not when, but now. Now is the magic you've been told to overlook. Now is the messy middle where clarity can still rise. Now is where you practice choosing again, forgiving again, starting again. This isn't a motivational gimmick. It's how real lives change. Not because the path is easy, but because the belief becomes solid. Because the decision to move forward becomes louder than the reasons not to. You've probably tried everything. The planning, the vision boards, the courses, the healing. And maybe they helped a little, or maybe they left you feeling like you're still the only one not getting the code to work. But I want to reframe that feeling, because it's not proof of failure. It's evidence that you're in process, that you're awake, that you're searching, and most importantly, that you still believe something can work. That belief is sacred. It's fuel. And this book is your invitation to stop holding your breath and start letting things unfold on your terms, at your pace, within your real life. Not when it's tidy, not when it's certain, but when it's true. You are the X on the treasure map. The ground you're standing on is not neutral, it's fertile, but you have to see it as sacred before you can plant anything in it. So we're going to build not from fantasy, but from truth. Your truth. Your current job, relationship, finances, faith, confusion, creativity, and courage. All of it is welcome here. You don't have to wait until life works to believe in yourself. You believe in yourself, and that's what makes life start working. Let's begin. For more information about the ebook version of this audio, check the video description or visit audiobooksoffice.com. Chapter 1. Stop waiting for the starting line. We are taught from an early age to wait for the right moment, the go-ahead, the perfect sign. We internalize the idea that before anything meaningful can happen in our lives, something external must occur, a milestone must be reached, a qualification must be earned, some sort of signal must be given to let us know, now you may begin. So we wait. And we wait. Life becomes a holding pattern, not because we lack vision, but because we've been convinced that vision without validation is reckless. We don't want to waste our effort, our voice, or our time. But while we're waiting to begin, life is quietly happening. And that is the real cost of waiting. We miss the present moment while preparing for the imaginary one. It is a dangerous myth, this idea of the starting line. It suggests that there is a singular moment when everything will suddenly align. Your confidence, your finances, your clarity, your support system. But life doesn't work that way. It rarely delivers all the green lights at once. It rarely gives you permission with fanfare and finality. More often than not, it asks you to move before you feel ready, before you have proof, before the fear has passed. The starting line isn't a place, it's a decision. It's a shift in mindset that says, I will begin not because everything is clear, but because I refuse to wait any longer for a life I already deserve. You don't need to arrive before you begin. You don't need to be healed to take the next step. You don't need to know the full map to start walking, and perhaps the most radical truth of all, you don't even need to feel confident. You simply need to feel willing. Willing to try again. Willing to fail forward. Willing to risk being seen, starting small. Because that's the quiet bravery that abundance responds to, not the illusion of having it all figured out, but the courage to move anyway. There's a subtle lie that often goes unnoticed in personal growth culture, and it's this: you must earn your breakthrough. As if progress only belongs to those who have perfectly aligned their energy, journaled their trauma, and cleared all emotional baggage. That kind of thinking keeps people stuck in cycles of endless preparation. Healing is important, self-awareness is powerful, but they are not prerequisites for progress. You can be healing and growing and still take aligned action. You can be uncertain and still move with clarity. You are not required to graduate from struggle before you are allowed to experience ease. The truth is simpler and much more freeing. You can start now, as you are. Think about all the things you've delayed, dreams you've shelved, ideas you've doubted, goals you've demoted to someday. How many of them are waiting for more resources, more time, more certainty? How many of them are held hostage by the belief that you are not yet enough to make them real? What would change if you removed the requirement to be ready and replaced it with the willingness to show up? This is not about hustle. This is not about grinding through resistance. This is about releasing the illusion that your life begins when conditions approve of you. It doesn't. It begins when you approve of the truth that what you have right now is not a limitation, it's a launch pad. People who experience transformation are not the ones who had all the answers from the start. They are the ones who learned how to start in the absence of answers. They said yes to their own unfolding. They stopped waiting for the world to declare them valid and instead moved from an inner knowing that they are already whole. You may not feel that truth every day, but that doesn't make it less real. You are not becoming worthy, you are recognizing the worth you already carry. This chapter is your invitation to stop postponing your power. Stop tying your progress to some imagined future where everything makes sense and feels easy. That future may come, or it may not, but your life is not a rehearsal for a better one. It is happening now. Every day you wait for a cleaner start, a safer leap, or more applause is a day you leave possibility on the table, not because you're incapable, but because you've believed the lie that power only comes after perfection. The truth is, power comes from presence, from being where you are, fully, from acting not because you are unafraid, but because what you are called to do matters more than your fear. You don't have to shout your beginning. You don't need a rebrand, a master plan, or a 10-step roadmap to start becoming more of yourself. You just have to stop delaying what your intuition has already said yes to. This doesn't mean recklessness. It means responsible rebellion. Rebelling against the belief that your now is not worthy of your energy. It is. In fact, it's the only place anything ever changes. The present is where your future gets built, one decision at a time. And here's something else most people forget. You are allowed to begin again as many times as you need. There's no cap on attempts, no expiration on dreams. Every new day is a new access point to progress. What felt impossible last year might feel within reach now. Not because the goal changed, but because you did. You gathered insight, strength, resilience. You learned what didn't work, you found what matters. All of that is data. All of it is useful. And all of it belongs here, in your now. Don't wait for applause. Don't wait for understanding. Don't wait for everything to feel perfect. Begin in the middle. Begin confused. Begin uncertain. Begin underqualified. Begin before you feel worthy. But begin. The starting line isn't a fixed location. It's wherever you decide to say yes to the life that's been calling you all along. Chapter 2. You're already standing on something solid. It's easy to believe that the life we want is always on the other side of something else. More time, more clarity, more resources, more belief. We imagine that when we finally get past the obstacles, that's when the real journey will begin. Until then, we see our current place as temporary, shaky, incomplete. We look at where we are and tell ourselves, this isn't the real thing yet. This is just the waiting room, the warm-up, the pit stop. But that belief quietly robs us of power, because if where you are isn't real, then you don't show up fully for it. You dismiss your own strength because you think you're not standing on anything yet, but the truth is, you're already on solid ground. You just haven't recognized it as such. Solid ground doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't mean total security or guaranteed outcomes. It means having enough to work with, enough to begin, enough to trust that even if you can't see the full staircase, the step you're on will hold your weight. That's all any forward movement really needs, one honest step in the direction of something more. You may not have everything you want yet, but if you've got breath in your lungs and a will to rise, you're not empty, you're not lost, you're equipped. But when you don't see your current place as worthy or workable, you keep deferring action. You keep outsourcing your confidence to some future version of yourself who will finally be ready. You hold your dreams at arm's length because you believe they belong to someone else, someone who lives in different circumstances or possesses different tools. And without realizing it, you become a stranger in your own life. You observe it, complain about it, analyze it, even try to escape it, but you don't fully inhabit it. You don't claim it. And what isn't claimed cannot be cultivated. There is a quiet kind of abundance that lives in the now. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's not always Instagrammable. It's the kind of abundance that whispers, look again. Look at what's already working. Look at what you've survived. Look at the resources you do have, the ideas you haven't yet used, the people who have your back, even if it's only one. The small signs that you're not as far off as you think. These things aren't accidental. They are your foundation. But if you're too busy staring at what's missing, you miss the materials you've already been given to build something different. We are all standing on top of choices we've made, lessons we've learned, and strength we've earned. We forget this when we focus only on what hasn't gone our way. We ignore the quiet victories, the moments we got back up, the ways we kept showing up even when no one was watching. We call those moments small, but they're not. They're bricks. They're structure. They're the evidence that something deeper has been forming, even if it hasn't bloomed yet. Your foundation may not look like someone else's, but that doesn't mean it's weak. It's yours, and that makes it powerful. The trap many people fall into is believing that unless things look impressive, they're not valuable. We chase the symbols of success, money, titles, recognition, because we've been told those are the signs that things are working. But often, the most important shifts happen quietly. In the moments you choose to try again, in the times you listen to your intuition instead of your fear, in the quiet decision to say no to what drains you and yes to what feels aligned. Those choices are not flashy, but they are seismic. They change your trajectory. They begin to build momentum under the surface. You might be standing in the middle of a life that looks incomplete, messy, or stalled. But even here, something is holding you. Some part of you has not given up. Some part of you is still hoping, still reaching, still imagining a future worth showing up for. That hope is not naive, it's sacred. It's what makes you resilient. It's what makes you human. And that hope is standing on something real, something solid, even if it's not fully visible yet. There's a freedom that comes when you stop waiting for better ground and start treating your current situation as worthy of your best effort. That doesn't mean settling. It doesn't mean pretending everything is fine when it's not. It means acknowledging that even in uncertainty there is strength. Even in confusion there is clarity waiting to be uncovered. Even in limitation there is creativity trying to come through. You don't have to love everything about your current reality, but you do have to respect it enough to work with it. Because this is the ground that will carry you into what's next. Not some imagined future, but this moment, this breath, this chance to engage with what is, rather than mourn what isn't. We tend to believe that once our lives feel secure, then we'll be brave. Once the risk is gone, then we'll take the leap. But life rarely gives us that guarantee. Most transformation begins when we choose to trust that we're standing on something strong enough to hold our next step. It's a quiet trust, not always easy, but deeply powerful. And once you make that decision to stop waiting and start working with what's here, you'll notice something remarkable. You'll begin to feel grounded, not because your situation changed, but because your relationship to it did. When you accept your current position as valid, you reclaim energy that was lost to frustration and doubt. You stop viewing your life as a placeholder and start treating it like the main event. You begin to ask better questions. You begin to show up differently, and little by little things begin to move. Not because the ground changed, but because you did. You stopped looking for external proof and started building internal belief. And that belief has gravity. It pulls in opportunity. It reveals solutions. It transforms what once felt unstable into something you can build on. You may still have goals that stretch beyond where you are. That's good. Keep them. But don't let them blind you to the truth. The climb begins here. The foundation is already under your feet. The only question is whether you'll trust it long enough to take the next step. Chapter 3. The Myth of Readiness and the Power of Motion. This is a story many people live by, often without realizing it, and it goes something like this. When I'm ready, I'll start. When I've healed enough, learned enough, earned enough, figured out enough, then I'll move. Then I'll step forward into the version of myself I can be proud of. On the surface, it sounds responsible, rational even. But underneath, it's fear dressed up as preparation. It's the belief that the right moment will arrive someday, and when it does, everything will click into place. That's the myth of readiness. And it's the reason so many people stay still, not because they lack desire, but because they are waiting for a signal that never comes. Readiness, as it's commonly imagined, is an illusion. There is no universal standard of enough that suddenly opens the gates to your next chapter. You don't cross a finish line and then get handed a permission slip to become who you are meant to be. More often than not, readiness is something you discover through movement, not something you wait for. You gain confidence by showing up. You find clarity by stepping in. You strengthen your belief not by sitting still, but by doing the very things that scare you into silence. The danger of chasing readiness is that it gives perfectionism room to thrive. If you're always waiting to be perfectly prepared, then nothing is ever quite good enough. not your plan, not your timing, not your self-belief. You become a master of stalling, dressed as planning. You do everything except the one thing that matters, starting. And over time, this postponement becomes a habit. Days turn into months, months into years, and eventually you convince yourself that maybe you weren't meant to move forward after all. But that's not the truth. The truth is, you were never lacking readiness. You were just holding yourself to an impossible standard of certainty, and that standard was never yours to begin with. The people who make things happen in this world are not the ones who always know what they're doing. They are the ones who are willing to move with what they've got. They start with incomplete ideas. They speak before they've perfectly articulated their message. They build while they walk. They give themselves permission to figure it out along the way, and in doing so, they generate momentum. Momentum is a kind of magic, not because it solves everything instantly, but because it shifts the energy. It breaks the spell of stagnation. It disrupts the belief that nothing is possible unless everything is perfect. It reminds you that action is its own kind of clarity. Motion reveals what the mind can't predict. No amount of overthinking can substitute for the learning that comes through real-world experience. You can imagine scenarios all day, map out every possible outcome, and still not know what's truly ahead. But when you move, you collect data. You get feedback. You see what works, what needs adjustment, what resonates and what doesn't. And that feedback becomes your guide. Not your fear, not your doubt, but your own lived experience. We often underestimate the value of small steps because they don't look impressive. We think real change has to be dramatic, public, or tied to some huge transformation. But often the most powerful shifts begin in quiet, simple choices. Saying yes to a conversation, sending the email, walking into the room, starting the project, even if it's messy. These small acts are not just logistical, they are declarations. They say, I believe in my own direction enough to move toward it, even without a guarantee. That's not recklessness. That's faith. That's leadership. That's what turns dreams into momentum and momentum into reality. One of the greatest lies you can believe is that your hesitation is wisdom. Sometimes it is, but often it's just disguised fear. Real wisdom moves with grounded courage, not indefinite postponement. It pauses to assess, not to avoid. If your hesitation leaves you more disconnected from your own intuition, more discouraged than discerning, then it's not wisdom. It's fear, hoping you'll call it something noble so it can keep you where you are. Your life doesn't begin when you're no longer afraid. It begins when you stop allowing fear to make your decisions. Fear isn't the enemy. It's a companion that shows up when you're getting close to something meaningful. It's an echo of your old story, trying to keep you safe. But you don't owe fear your leadership. You owe it your attention, perhaps, but not your direction. You can acknowledge the nerves and still take the step. You can feel uncertain and still choose forward motion. There will never be a version of you that is immune to fear, self-doubt, or uncertainty, and that's okay. The goal isn't to become fearless. The goal is to become faithful, so full of purpose, belief, and alignment that your forward motion becomes non-negotiable. You keep going not because you're always sure, but because what you're building matters more than your comfort. You trust that what you're creating has value even if no one claps right away. You decide that progress matters more than perfection and that showing up imperfectly is still better than standing still in potential. You may be tempted to wait for more information, more validation, more signs that you're ready. But if you look closely, you'll see you already have what you need to begin. You have a longing that won't leave you alone. You have a vision that keeps nudging you forward. You have the ability to take one action, however small, in the direction of something better. That's readiness. That's all it ever was. So stop holding your future hostage to a version of yourself who has no doubts, no fears, and no flaws. That version doesn't exist. But the one who's here right now, the one who has questions and hope and strength and flaws, that version is more than enough. That version is ready to move, not because everything is certain, but because it no longer makes sense to wait. When you let go of the myth of readiness, you make space for the truth of movement, and in movement things begin to change, not because they were waiting for you to become perfect, but because they were waiting for you to begin. Chapter 4. How to Trust While It's Still Messy. One of the hardest things to do is believe in something that hasn't fully formed yet, to stay committed to a path that still looks unclear, to trust in motion when the outcomes are uncertain, delayed, or completely invisible. We are taught to trust when we see results, to have faith when the feedback is positive, to believe in ourselves when we're being affirmed or celebrated. But real trust, the kind that transforms lives, is born in the mess. It takes shape when everything around you still looks like chaos and you're trying to hold on to a thread of belief that says, even this is part of something good. That's the kind of trust that moves mountains, not the kind you borrow from success, but the kind you build when nothing makes sense yet. The truth is, the path to alignment is rarely a straight line. It's winding, disjointed, filled with trial and error. It often looks like failure before it feels like purpose. Things fall apart before they fall together. Relationships shift, plans collapse. What once felt solid begins to wobble, and what once felt certain now seems foreign. In those moments, it's easy to think you're doing something wrong. It's easy to panic, to pull back, to make fear-based decisions just to regain a sense of control. But if you do that too soon, you miss the part where the mess becomes meaningful. You don't get to witness what unfolds when you choose to stay grounded in your direction, even while the details are still unraveling. Learning to trust in the middle is a different skill set than learning to trust when things are stable. It's not about ignoring the mess or pretending it's not difficult. It's about choosing to believe that difficulty doesn't mean defeat, that discomfort doesn't mean disqualification, that just because you can't see the whole picture doesn't mean it's not being painted. Every meaningful shift begins with disruption. Every breakthrough is preceded by a stretch. But if you judge the process too early, you'll keep abandoning what's working simply because it hasn't produced proof yet. Most people don't quit because they lack desire. They quit because they mistook turbulence for a sign that they were off track. They expected things to feel better faster, and when that didn't happen, they labeled the friction as failure. But growth isn't always graceful. In fact, the most powerful expansions are often the most uncomfortable. Your soul isn't asking for ease, it's asking for alignment. And alignment doesn't mean everything feels good all the time. It means you're moving in integrity with your deeper values, even when it feels like nothing is going your way. To trust in the mess is to stop outsourcing your peace to your circumstances. It's deciding that clarity is allowed to arrive slowly, that progress can be invisible before it becomes undeniable, that your energy is not wasted just because your effort hasn't been recognized yet. You can trust your direction even when the path hasn't cleared. You can trust your growth even when it feels like standing still. You can trust your worth even when no one else sees it yet. That's the difference between passive waiting and active faith. Waiting looks for signs. Faith moves as if the signs already exist. You don't need certainty to keep going. You need a reason, a why, a deeper truth that reminds you of what you're building and why it matters. Because the mess will try to convince you to give up. It will offer you escape routes that look like comfort but lead to regret. It will whisper that maybe you're not cut out for this. Maybe you misread the vision. Maybe it's too late. But those voices are not telling the truth. They're testing your commitment. They're asking whether your belief is built on convenience or conviction. And your answer matters because it determines whether you pivot with purpose or retreat in panic. There is something profound that happens when you choose to trust before you have proof. You begin to carry yourself differently. You make decisions from a place of inner knowing rather than outer approval. You stop reacting to the chaos and start responding with clarity. You begin to anchor yourself not in what is happening, but in who you're becoming, and when that shift takes hold, your relationship with the mess changes. It no longer feels like something to escape, it becomes something to walk through with presence and power. This doesn't mean you ignore reality, it means you become more discerning about what reality actually is. Just because things are hard doesn't mean they're wrong. Just because something isn't happening on your timeline doesn't mean it's not happening. We are so trained to associate delay with denial that we forget life often rearranges before it delivers. Your job is not to control the timing. Your job is to keep showing up in truth, to keep choosing your own voice, and to keep doing the next right thing with integrity, even if it's small, even if it's unseen. Trust in its most honest form is not passive, it's deeply engaged, it pays attention, it adjusts when needed. It asks better questions. It doesn't pretend the mess isn't there, it just doesn't allow the mess to have the final word. When you learn how to trust from within, the outer world loses some of its power over your emotional state. You begin to lead yourself instead of waiting for life to reassure you. You stop needing things to be neat before you act. You start recognizing that every season, even the chaotic ones, can be sacred if you approach it with intention. There is no shame in being in the middle of a mess. That's where most real things happen. That's where old patterns are broken, where new beliefs are born, where identity begins to shift. It's not glamorous, it's not clean, but it's real. And anything that's real has the potential to become meaningful if you don't abandon it too early. You may not have all the answers, you may not feel steady every day, but you're still here. Still breathing, still trying. And that counts, that matters. That's enough to keep going. What you are walking through now might not be the final version of your vision, but it might be the exact environment you need to grow the muscles that vision will require. You're not failing just because you're tired. You're not off track just because things are unclear. You're in process, and process is sacred. Let it shape you, not shame you. Hold the vision loosely, but your value tightly. Be willing to change the method, but not the message. Trust that something beautiful is forming, even if it's still covered in dust. And if all you can do today is keep walking with your eyes open and your heart soft, then you're doing just fine. Chapter 5. Abundance isn't earned, it's remembered. One of the most deeply ingrained beliefs we carry, often without question, is that abundance is something we must earn. That we must prove ourselves worthy of it through hard work, relentless effort, endless improvement, or some elusive level of spiritual maturity. It's the kind of mindset that seeps into everything, how we approach love, money, time, opportunity, even rest. We believe that unless we've struggled enough, healed enough, given enough, or sacrificed enough, we haven't qualified for abundance. This belief isn't just exhausting, it's a distortion of the truth. Because real abundance doesn't arrive as a reward. It doesn't show up only after we've paid our dues. Abundance is something we remember, something we awaken to, something we align with. It is not transaction. It is foundational. It is not handed out. It is uncovered. Abundance is not a far-off destination or a rare event. It is a current that flows beneath the surface of everything. But when you've been taught to believe that scarcity is normal, abundance feels suspicious. When you've lived through lack, trauma, or instability, it's hard to trust good things when they come. Your nervous system becomes wired to anticipate the crash, the betrayal, the decline. Though even when life begins to offer something better, you might question it, sabotage it, or simply not recognize it. That's not because you're broken. It's because your internal compass has been conditioned to expect struggle. And shifting that compass requires more than just motivation. It requires a fundamental rewiring of how you relate to yourself and the world around you. To remember abundance is to start from a different premise entirely. It means accepting, even when it feels radical, that you are not here to earn your worth, you are here to express it. You are not chasing value, you are embodying it. The abundance you seek is not waiting in a vault, locked behind some spiritual or emotional gate. It's already present, already possible, already within reach. But you have to believe you're allowed to access it now, not after you fix your flaws or clean up your past, but right now, in the life you are living, as the person you are becoming. This doesn't mean you won't work hard. It doesn't mean you won't face challenges or put in effort, but it shifts the reason you're doing it. You're not striving to be worthy. You're expanding because you already are. You're not hustling to deserve peace. You're stepping into peace because it's your birthright. This shift is subtle but powerful. It moves you from a survival mindset into a creative one, from grasping to receiving, from fear-driven action to soul-led intention. And when that shift happens, your life starts to respond differently, not because the world changed, but because you did. One of the reasons people stay disconnected from abundance is because they define it too narrowly. They think abundance is only about money or luxury or visible success. But abundance shows up in so many forms. A deep exhale after a hard week, a conversation that reminds you you're not alone, an idea that lights you up, a moment of laughter that cuts through your doubt. These are not small things. They are signals. They are proof that life is always offering you something, even when the big breakthroughs haven't arrived yet. If you wait to feel abundant until your external conditions match some ideal, you will spend your whole life waiting. But if you train your awareness to notice the abundance already surrounding you, you will begin to attract more of it, because you'll finally be resonating with it. This is not about pretending everything is fine when it's not. It's about refusing to let what's missing blind you to what's present. It's about holding space for your desire to grow while still honoring what's already good. That's the paradox of true abundance. It invites both contentment and expansion. It allows you to want more without shame, but it never tells you that you must be more in order to deserve joy, ease, or fulfillment. You can want to grow without disowning the worth of where you are. You can pursue transformation while still honoring your current season as sacred. That balance is what keeps you grounded in truth instead of spinning in lack. The work of remembering abundance is not a one-time epiphany. It's a practice. It's the choice to reframe, to re-anchor, to remind yourself of what's true every time scarcity tries to take the mic again. Scarcity says there's not enough. Abundance says there's always a way. Scarcity says you're behind. Abundance says you're in process. Scarcity says only certain people get to win. Abundance says there's space for everyone, and the more often you practice choosing the abundant thought, the more it becomes your default, not because your life is perfect, but because your perception is healing. This healing shows up in the way you talk to yourself, in the way you spend your time, in the opportunities you notice, the boundaries you hold, the risks you take. You begin to say yes to things that scared you before, not because the fear is gone, but because the story has changed. You stop waiting to feel ready. You stop asking for permission. You start moving as someone who trusts that life responds to energy, and that your energy is enough. You don't beg for your breakthrough. You make space for it. You don't force alignment. You lean into it. What you will find again and again is that the more you move from this mindset, the more your external life starts to reflect it. People show up, doors open, ideas land. You begin to feel a rhythm in your life that wasn't there before, not because everything got easier, but because you stopped resisting what's already true, that you are allowed to thrive, that things are allowed to work for you, that you don't have to wait until you're more, or better, or healed to be supported, that you don't have to apologize for wanting a life that feels rich in every sense of the word. Abundance isn't waiting for you to prove yourself, it's waiting for you to return to yourself, to stop outsourcing your value to outcomes, to stop shrinking to fit other people's comfort zones, to stop operating from a mindset of scarcity just because the world taught you to be cautious. This life you're building doesn't have to be a grind. It can be intentional. It can be soulful. It can be joyful, and it can begin not someday but here. Chapter 6. Work with what's in your hands. So much of what we chase in life seems just out of reach. The career that clicks, the opportunity that finally opens doors, the clarity that settles the noise. We imagine that the real breakthrough lies somewhere down the road, past the waiting, past the current limitations, just beyond the next milestone. This kind of thinking feels logical. It's how most of us were taught to navigate progress. You plan, you prepare, and eventually the perfect tools show up. But in the process of waiting for the right tools, the right time, the right people, many people miss what's already within reach. They overlook the resources already available. They underestimate the power of what's in their hands. There's something profoundly liberating about realizing that you don't need more before you begin. You need perspective. You need attention. You need to pause long enough to see that what you have right now might not be complete, but it's enough to start something. It's enough to create motion, and in many cases, motion is what attracts more clarity, more alignment, more support. But if you stay still, believing that your lack disqualifies you from momentum, you cut yourself off from the very thing that generates growth. Working with what's in your hands doesn't mean settling. It doesn't mean lowering your standards or abandoning your vision. It means using the present as a valid launching point instead of treating it like a placeholder. It means honoring the tools you already have, your skills, your creativity, your relationships, your resilience, and seeing them not as scraps but as seeds. Anything planted with intention has the potential to grow, but seeds won't sprout if they're left in a drawer waiting for better conditions. They need to be put in the soil, and your current life, even if it feels unfinished or imperfect, is the soil. There is no shortage of stories about people who did a lot with very little. People who built thriving lives and movements with borrowed tools, broken beginnings, and limited support. What set them apart wasn't luck or perfect timing. It was their decision to make something out of what was already in their possession. They stopped wishing for a better hand and started playing the cards they had with focus and heart. That's what working with what's in your hands really is. It's not just about practicality. It's about ownership. Ownership of your energy, ownership of your creativity, ownership of your power to shift direction without needing someone else to validate the process. The world will always tell you that you need more credentials, more followers, more income, more polish. But waiting for more becomes a trap when you believe it's the only way forward. The truth is, many people who seem successful didn't have more when they started. They had the same doubts, the same scarcity, the same imperfections. What they did differently was decide to move anyway. They built with what they had, knowing it wasn't everything, but trusting it was something, and that trust created traction. We live in a culture that values preparation over initiation, but too much preparation becomes a form of procrastination. You start rehearsing your dreams instead of embodying them. You collect knowledge but delay application. You convince yourself that you're being responsible when really you're just afraid to be seen starting from where you are. But here's the truth no one tells you. Starting messy is still starting. Using limited tools is still using powerfully. And doing what you can now is still far more productive than waiting for the illusion of readiness. What's in your hands might not look like much right now. Maybe it's a partially formed idea, maybe it's a rough draft, a low bunch of version, a side hustle, a few connections, or a few hours a week. But that's enough to build something real. That's enough to light a spark. You don't need to be everything to start becoming something. The most extraordinary stories usually begin with a single, ordinary action, a choice to do what's possible today. And the thing is, when you make the most of what's in your hands, the universe often responds by placing more in them. But it rarely works the other way around. Life waits to see what you'll do with the current opportunity before it hands you the next. There's also something sacred about the creative tension of not having it all figured out. It sharpens your focus. It demands your resourcefulness. It forces you to stretch in ways you never would if everything was perfectly arranged. That stretch builds muscles, emotional, mental, spiritual, that will serve you far beyond this season. When you embrace what's in your hands, you activate a different kind of power. A power that says, I will not postpone my progress just because my conditions are not ideal. I will not wait until I am validated to trust that I have something valuable to offer. There's a myth that you need external resources to unlock your internal value, but many people have all the tools and still never build, because it's not about the tools, it's about the belief behind them. The belief that your work matters, that your voice matters, that your journey is allowed to start before it makes sense to everyone else. When that belief anchors in, you stop measuring what you lack and start amplifying what you carry, and often that shift alone is enough to move you forward. Look at your life today, not the version you wish you had, but the one you're in. What are the raw materials already present? What insights, skills, connections, passions, or stories are sitting unused because they don't look shiny enough? What could happen if you stopped overlooking them? If you honored them as the starting point they actually are? You don't need to wait for the perfect version of your life to arrive before you start building the meaningful one. You just need to believe that what's already in your hands is worth using. Progress is not always about getting more. Often it's about getting creative with less. It's about turning a spark into a flame, a whisper into a voice, a moment into momentum. That power is not reserved for the well-equipped. It's available to anyone who is willing to meet life with what they have, where they are, without apology or delay. So take inventory, not of what's missing, but of what's present. Take the step, not because it's the final one, but because it's the next one. What's in your hands is not just enough. It's exactly what's required for your next move. Use it. Chapter 7. Your environment isn't your excuse. It's easy to blame the environment we're in for the stagnation we feel. The wrong city, the draining job, the unsupportive people, the lack of resources or inspiration around us. When things aren't working, the natural reaction is to look outward and wonder how we can possibly thrive when nothing around us seems designed to help us succeed. The stories begin quietly but grow quickly. If I lived somewhere else, things would be different. If I had better friends, a bigger network, more aligned collaborators, then I could really move. These thoughts often feel valid because there's some truth in them. Our environment does shape us. It influences our energy, our decisions, our emotional state. But while your environment may affect you, it does not define you. It is not the ultimate authority on your possibility. The idea that your environment must be perfect before you make progress is not only false, it's deeply disempowering. You can grow in less than ideal conditions. In fact, most people do. Some of the most transformational decisions, the most meaningful work, the most powerful breakthroughs happen in places that were never designed to hold them. They happen in small apartments, crowded houses, hostile workplaces, and overlooked communities. They happen in solitude, in noise, in resistance, not because the environment is ideal, but because someone within it decided that the environment wasn't going to get the final say. Growth, in its purest form, is a refusal to be limited by circumstance. It's the quiet belief that no matter where you're planted, you can bloom. When you let your environment dictate your pace, your worth, or your vision, you surrender your power without even realizing it. You start aligning with the energy around you instead of the energy within you. If you're surrounded by people who complain, you might stop creating. If you're in a culture that values stability over expansion, you might shrink your dreams to fit what feels acceptable. If you work in a place that rewards silence over truth, you might begin to doubt your voice. These effects are real. but so is your ability to interrupt them. You don't need permission from your surroundings to choose a new narrative. You can bring different energy into the same space and shift how you experience it, even if the space itself never changes. This doesn't mean you deny reality. It means you stop giving it the power to dictate your response. Some environments truly are toxic. Some people truly are draining. Some places are not where you're meant to stay long term. But while you're there, you're still allowed to evolve. You're still allowed to create. You're still allowed to dream, plan, and take action. The prison isn't the room. It's the belief that the room is in control. That's the mindset that keeps people stuck. They don't just live in limitations. They internalize them. And once you internalize your environment as permanent, it becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. But you don't have to live that story. You can start shifting your life from wherever you are, not once you escape, but now. Not when things are easier, but while they're still messy. Your environment may not be ideal, but your intention can still be powerful. Your goals can still be valid. Your energy can still be different from what surrounds you, and that difference is often what initiates change, not just in your life, but in the atmosphere itself. When one person starts showing up differently, it changes the dynamic. It sets a new standard. It reveals what's possible. It doesn't guarantee that the people around you will change, but it reminds you that you can. Sometimes the challenge of a difficult environment is exactly what forges the clarity and grit you'll need later on. It pushes you to innovate. It reveals who's really aligned with you. It teaches you how to listen to your own voice when external voices are loud. That internal leadership, once developed, becomes unshakable. You stop needing your surroundings to validate your direction. You stop waiting for things to be easier before you take your next step. You stop excusing your potential because the context isn't convenient. That shift doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's simply choosing to create anyway, to write in a noisy apartment, to think expansively in a job that feels small, to hold boundaries in a space where they've never been honored. These acts may feel subtle, but they are seismic. They are how you declare to life, I am still moving, still growing, still becoming, even here, especially here. You're allowed to outgrow your environment. You're allowed to feel the tension between where you are and where you want to be. But that tension isn't a reason to shut down. It's a signal to build strength. You don't have to romanticize your circumstances, but you do have to take responsibility for how you respond to them. If you keep waiting for your environment to change before you allow yourself to grow, you'll be stuck for a very long time. But if you decide to grow now, to rise anyway, you begin to take your power back. Every great transformation story includes a scene where the protagonist is stuck in a place that doesn't fit. But the ones who rise are the ones who stop letting their setting define their story. They create their own momentum. They refuse to shrink just because the room feels small. They don't wait for ideal conditions. They start with what they have. They bring energy, belief, and effort to places that never expected to hold that much power. And eventually those places either change or they leave them behind, but they don't wait to rise. You don't need to be surrounded by inspiration to be inspired. You don't need a peaceful space to cultivate peace. You don't need everyone around you to get it before you give yourself permission to go after it. The energy you bring can be stronger than the energy you're in. Your intention can become an anchor. Your clarity can become a compass. And your progress can begin from right where you stand, even if it's not where you plan to stay. What's around you doesn't get to define what's within you unless you allow it. And when you stop waiting for your environment to validate your growth, you open up space for growth to lead you out of that environment. But it starts with you, not the location, not the job, not the people, you. Chapter 8. Momentum doesn't ask for permission. Momentum has a strange and powerful quality. It's not always loud, It's not always fast. It doesn't always begin with a dramatic burst of action or a huge announcement. Often momentum starts with a quiet decision, a shift in energy, a single choice to keep going when you could have easily stopped. One small step that doesn't seem important in the moment, but begins to build something real over time. And the most important truth about momentum is that it doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't wait for full clarity or full confidence. It doesn't wait until the fear goes away. It just needs a willing participant, someone who is more committed to progress than perfection, more devoted to movement than approval. Because once momentum starts, it begins to work in your favor, sometimes before you even notice. We are trained to think that action should follow certainty, that you move when the timing is right, when all the variables are favorable, when you have enough support or knowledge or belief in yourself. But real change often works in the opposite direction. You start moving and then the belief begins to rise. You take the first step and then the clarity begins to appear. You act, not because you're fully ready, but because staying still has become too painful. That's where momentum finds its opening, not in your perfection, but in your willingness. Momentum is not about speed, it's about direction. You can be moving slowly and still be gaining momentum. You can be unsure and still be gaining momentum. What matters is that you're not sitting in the same place, endlessly cycling through the same thoughts, the same doubts, the same justifications for staying stuck. The moment you break that cycle, even with the smallest of moves, you shift your energy, you create a new rhythm, and with consistency that rhythm begins to carry you. But momentum doesn't feel like magic at first. It often feels inconvenient. It pulls you out of your comfort zone. It asks you to show up when no one's watching, to keep going when there's no immediate reward, to act on faith rather than evidence. And that's why so many people never experience its full power. They expect momentum to feel like inspiration, like excitement, like ease. But momentum starts in the mundane, in the practice, in the repetition, in the showing up. Not once or twice, but again and again, until the energy begins to gather and the shift becomes undeniable. You do not need to be fearless to build momentum. You need to be available. You need to be willing to be seen starting, willing to be imperfect, willing to take steps without knowing how far they'll go. Every person you admire who's achieved something meaningful began with an ordinary moment of choosing not to quit. Choosing not to pause until it was more convenient, choosing not to wait for applause. And that choice, repeated enough times, becomes momentum. The beautiful thing about momentum is that it eventually starts to work on your behalf. It begins to create traction. You gain emotional leverage. The same effort that once felt heavy starts to feel lighter. You begin to trust yourself more. The resistance lessens, not because the path has changed, but because you have. Still, one of the most common ways people interrupt momentum is by constantly questioning their direction, by analyzing every move, seeking constant reassurance, trying to predict every outcome before taking action. But progress isn't born out of analysis, it's born out of commitment. Not blind commitment, but the kind that says, I'm here for this, I'm building this, and I'm not abandoning the process just because it feels uncertain. When you stay in motion, even without guarantees, you learn faster, grow faster, and build something far more resilient than someone who waits for ideal circumstances. Momentum isn't always visible to the outside world. It doesn't always look impressive. Sometimes it looks like you sitting at your desk, doing the hard work no one else sees. Sometimes it looks like saying no to what distracts you, even when saying yes would feel easier. Sometimes it looks like choosing to stay with a project, a process, or a personal commitment because you know that quitting would take you further away from who you're becoming. These moments might not feel like milestones, but they are. They're what momentum is made of. Those invisible victories that only you can recognize and only you can choose to honor. You don't need the world to validate your effort before your effort matters. You don't need results to justify the process. Momentum isn't a reward for success. It's a pathway to it. And once you begin to experience its rhythm, you'll understand why staying still for too long always feels like stagnation. You're not meant to be motionless. You're meant to grow, to move, to expand. But that movement has to start from within. No one can give you momentum. You create it by how you show up for your own life. The moment you stop waiting for a green light is the moment you begin to create one. That choice to move forward even when it's dark, even when it's uncertain, is what separates those who grow from those who repeat. You may not have the perfect plan. You may still feel unsure, but if you know that the path you're on is aligned with something honest inside you, then the only thing that matters is continuing. That consistency over time becomes identity, and that identity becomes the engine behind your transformation. You might not always feel motivated. That's normal. Motivation is a wave. It comes and goes. But momentum is steadier. It builds with practice, with presence, with patience, and the more you honor it, the more reliable it becomes. You don't need to chase it. You need to meet it. Meet it with discipline. Meet it with belief. Meet it with action. And watch how quickly life begins to meet you back. The beauty of momentum is that it respects effort. It amplifies what you bring to it. And the more you show up, the more it shows up for you. It may not look glamorous, especially at the beginning, but if you trust the rhythm, if you keep stepping forward even when no one's watching, you will reach places that once felt impossible. Not because you had all the answers, but because you moved when others froze. You committed when others hesitated. You believed when it was easier to doubt. And that is how momentum is built. One bold, consistent step at a time. Chapter 9. Resourcefulness over resources. It's easy to believe that the people who succeed in life are the ones who have the most money, the best connections, the ideal timing, the right degrees, the clearest path. This belief is reinforced by what we see. We notice the stories of people who had access, who were born into opportunity, who had help at every step. What we don't always see are the people who succeeded not because of what they had, but because of how they used it. They weren't the most resourced, they were the most resourceful. They didn't wait for ideal conditions. They didn't complain about the lack. They simply asked themselves, what can I do with what I have, from where I am, with who I've become? And then they moved. The power of resourcefulness is that it shifts your focus. It trains you to see possibilities instead of problems. It turns obstacles into creative prompts. It activates something primal and powerful within you. The part of you that remembers how to adapt, how to create, how to find a way when the obvious path is blocked. That's where momentum is born, not in access, but in attitude. Not in having everything figured out, but in trusting yourself enough to figure it out as you go. There are countless people with all the resources in the world who never move. They wait, they plan, they hesitate, they doubt. And there are people with almost nothing who change the world, not because they had more, but because they dared to use what was in their reach. This isn't just about money. It's about energy. It's about voice. It's about problem solving. It's about finding a way forward when everything in your environment tells you that forward isn't available. Being resourceful means refusing to accept no as a permanent answer. It means refusing to let a closed door be the end of the conversation. It means asking better questions, taking unconventional steps, creating new options instead of waiting for them to appear. Resourcefulness is how you reclaim your power in moments of lack. It doesn't deny the difficulty. It simply refuses to give the difficulty all the authority. If you're waiting to feel like you have enough before you move, you may wait forever. Enough isn't just a quantity, it's a perspective. You can look at your current life and see what's missing, or you can look at it and ask, what's workable here? What's already mine that I've been overlooking? What can I learn, repurpose, or apply differently? That mental shift might not solve every problem, but it breaks the paralysis. It reminds you that you are not helpless. You have options. You always do. This is especially important when you're creating something new, a career, a business, a chapter of healing, a relationship dynamic, a way of living that feels more authentic. At first, you probably won't have all the tools. You might feel underqualified, unsupported, and unseen. But that doesn't mean you're not capable. In fact, some of the most aligned paths are built entirely from makeshift tools, from borrowed knowledge, from YouTube tutorials, from borrowed space and late nights and uncertain plans. What matters is not how impressive your tools look, but how committed you are to using them. Progress isn't reserved for the well-equipped. It's accessible to the brave, the flexible, the focused. To those who refuse to wait for ideal conditions before they decide to begin. You have more than you think. That's not a fluffy affirmation, it's a practical truth. If you were to make a list right now of your lived experiences, your skills, your contacts, your insights, your past lessons, and your access points, you'd be shocked at how much raw material you already have. But most people never do this because they're too busy measuring what they lack. They're so caught up in comparing their beginning to someone else's middle that they forget they've already walked through fires that taught them everything they need to take their next step. But information without self-belief just becomes noise. You need to remember not just what you've survived, but how that survival shaped your ability to think differently, act courageously, and create without a script. Being resourceful also requires letting go of perfectionism. When you don't have all the tools, you have to get scrappy. You have to let things be messy. You have to release the fantasy of doing everything right and instead focus on doing the next thing well enough to keep moving. Resourcefulness thrives in experimentation. It thrives in willingness. It thrives in the courage to be seen, trying, adjusting, and trying again. You will learn more in 3 days of messy doing than you will in 3 months of perfect planning. But to access that kind of growth, you have to stop obsessing over having the perfect blueprint. You have to start trusting that you can build something meaningful, even when the instructions are incomplete. Sometimes resourcefulness looks like asking for help when you don't want to. Sometimes it looks like using free tools, bartering your skills, or reaching out to people you haven't talked to in years. Sometimes it means learning how to edit your own videos, design your own website, write your own copy, or study your own finances. It's not about becoming an expert in everything. It's about realizing that you can start without experts. You can start now. And that start, no matter how humble, carries power. There will always be people who tell you that it's impossible without X, Y, or Z. They'll give you rules they believe to be true. But most of those rules are just stories passed down from people who were afraid to find out what's possible without them. You don't have to follow those stories. You can write a new one where you didn't wait until you had every piece lined up before you moved. One where you used what was available, trusted your gut, and learned as you went. One where the lack didn't define you. It shaped you into someone more resilient, more creative, and more powerful than you would have been in comfort. The invitation isn't to pretend that resources don't matter. They do. But you don't have to be defined by your current access. You don't have to let that be the excuse you reach for every time you're tempted to delay. You can still move. You can still build. You can still shift your life forward with the tools you have today. And when you do that consistently, the gap between where you are and where you want to be begins to close. Not because someone handed you what you needed, but because you discovered it within yourself. Resourcefulness is a mindset before it's a method. Choose it, and you'll find new ways forward even when the old ones are blocked. Chapter 10. How to Find Peace Without Pausing Growth. There's a quiet trap that many people fall into on the journey of self-improvement. It's the belief that peace and growth cannot coexist. that you must choose one or the other, that in order to build, stretch, evolve, or expand, you must temporarily set aside your sense of calm. Or, conversely, that the only way to protect your peace is to avoid pushing too hard, striving too much, or stepping into discomfort. This binary way of thinking creates unnecessary tension between two things that are not only compatible, but essential to each other. True growth does not require the abandonment of peace, and true peace does not demand the absence of ambition. You can hold both. You must learn to hold both if you want to build a life that is both sustainable and soul-aligned. Peace is not a passive state. It's not the absence of effort or challenge. It's not the silence that follows the end of action. It's not something you earn by withdrawing from life. Real peace is active. It's the grounded, rooted sense of self that allows you to navigate pressure without being consumed by it. It's what keeps your center steady when the outer world is full of moving parts. It's the deep, inner knowing that you are anchored to something true, even as you change, adapt, or take bold action. And this kind of peace doesn't require you to stop growing. In fact, it supports your growth. It gives you the clarity and strength to stretch without snapping. The problem is, most of us were not taught to grow from a peaceful place. We were taught to associate growth with hustle, urgency, burnout, and anxiety. We believed that progress had to be hard, that discomfort was a sign of virtue, that if it felt calm, we must not be doing enough. So we burned ourselves out chasing transformation, convincing ourselves that we had to earn our evolution through chaos. And when we finally paused, we mistook the relief for complacency. We believed the only way to maintain peace was to stop trying altogether. But peace and progress were never meant to be opposites. They are partners. They enhance each other when we stop treating them as enemies. To find peace without pausing growth, you must shift the way you approach expansion. Growth doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be manic. It doesn't have to feel like a war against yourself. It can be steady, deliberate, intentional. You can pursue big goals without sprinting. You can take bold steps without forcing outcomes. You can challenge yourself while still protecting your nervous system. The key is to stop equating urgency with importance. Just because something is urgent doesn't mean it's aligned. And just because you're calm doesn't mean you're stuck. Some of the most transformational seasons of your life may feel deceptively still on the surface because the real work is happening inside you. Peace in the middle of growth looks like taking breaks without guilt. It looks like saying no to what doesn't align, even if it means disappointing others. It looks like creating boundaries around your energy so that you can continue to show up with intention. It looks like checking in with yourself, not just once a month, but regularly, so that your goals stay connected to your truth. It looks like choosing depth over speed. It looks like believing that how you arrive matters just as much as where you're going. You can reach your destination exhausted and bitter, or you can get there grounded and whole. The choice is yours, and the process will always reflect what you prioritized. Some people associate peace with apathy because they've only ever known action through anxiety. So when they finally slow down, their mind panics. It tells them they're falling behind, that they've lost their edge, that they'll be forgotten if they stop performing at a frenetic pace. But peace doesn't erase your fire. It refines it. It reminds you that your value isn't tied to your output, that you don't have to prove your worth through nonstop action, that your vision will unfold with more clarity if you stop constantly trying to control it. When you embrace peace as part of your process, you stop wasting energy on panic. You channel that energy into purpose instead. There will be seasons when your pace quickens. That's natural, but even in those seasons you can stay grounded. You can ask better questions. You can create from desire rather than fear. You can rest as a strategy, not as a reward for burnout. You can pause to recalibrate, not to escape. That's the difference between healthy growth and reactive motion. One honors your whole self. The other sacrifices your well-being in the name of performance. One creates sustainability, the other creates cycles of exhaustion that eventually catch up with you. Finding peace without pausing, growth, also means you must get honest about what peace really is for you. Is it silence, stillness, autonomy, creativity, time freedom, emotional safety? Peace is not one size fits all. It looks different for everyone, and you can't borrow someone else's version. You have to define it for yourself. Otherwise, you'll keep chasing someone else's dream life, wondering why it never satisfies you. Once you know what peace feels like in your body, in your daily rhythms, in your relationships, then you can begin to build your life in a way that supports it, even while you reach for more. Your peace matters. It is not a luxury to be enjoyed only after you've proven your productivity. It is not a bonus that arrives when everything is finally working. It is a practice, a commitment, and a foundation. You will never create a life that works if you're always sacrificing your well-being to get there. And you don't need to. You can design a life that honors both your vision and your values. One that includes space for rest, for joy, for breath. One that allows you to grow from a place of wholeness instead of chasing wholeness through growth. This is how things begin to work. Not when you abandon ambition, but when you stop letting it control your peace. Not when you stop building, but when you start building differently, with intention, with presence, with respect for your own capacity, with trust that things will unfold more clearly when you're not trying to outrun your own nervous system. This kind of peace is not passive, it's powerful, and it's available to you now, even if everything isn't perfect yet. You don't need to pause your life to feel calm. You don't need to mute your growth to find peace. You are allowed to expand and rest, to stretch and breathe, to want more and still feel enough. That's not a contradiction, it's alignment. And the more you practice it, the more sustainable everything you're building will become. Chapter 11. Alignment beats hustle every time. We live in a world that worships hustle. The grind is glorified, the sleepless nights are worn as badges of honor, and the idea that hard work alone is the path to success has become a belief so ingrained, many never stop to question it. We are taught that more is better, faster is better, and that rest or stillness is a sign of weakness or laziness. But beneath the surface of all this constant motion, something far more powerful is often overlooked. Alignment. Because when you are aligned, everything you do carries more impact. Your energy is cleaner, your decisions are clearer, and the work you put in actually begins to create the outcomes you're striving for. Hustle may generate movement, but alignment generates momentum that actually means something. Hustle by itself is just motion. It is activity without necessarily any direction. It's doing more in the name of progress, but not always asking whether what you're doing actually matters. It's waking up early, staying up late, burning through your time and energy without pausing to ask the most important question. Is this taking me where I want to go? Is this serving who I want to become? Hustle can be addictive. It gives the illusion of control. It feels productive. But if you're constantly grinding from a place of fear, desperation, or pressure, it's only a matter of time before you burn out, or worse, succeed at building something that doesn't even feel like yours. Alignment, on the other hand, is about clarity. It's about congruence. It's about making choices that reflect your values, your truth, your long-term vision, not just your short-term insecurities. When you are aligned, your actions support your actual goals, not just your need to prove yourself or keep up with someone else's timeline. You stop chasing success as a performance and start defining it on your own terms. That shift in energy is subtle, but it changes everything, because aligned work feels different. It's still effort, but it's effort that energizes you instead of draining you. It's still challenge, but it's challenge that grows you instead of breaking you. You can hustle your way into temporary wins, but you can't hustle your way into peace. You can't grind your way into fulfillment. At some point, if your actions are not rooted in alignment, the effort you're putting in begins to feel hollow. You start resenting the work. You start questioning the point of it all. You begin to feel like no matter how much you do, it's never enough. That's because your soul isn't asking you to do more. It's asking you to do differently. It's asking you to pause, to listen, to redirect. Not based on urgency, but based on truth. This is not a rejection of effort. It's a redefinition of where effort comes from. Aligned effort comes from purpose, not pressure. From inner commitment, not external validation. And the results are different. When you're aligned, you attract more of what's meant for you. You stop forcing outcomes. You stop trying to convince people to see your value. You start making decisions from a place of self-respect and inner knowing, and that creates a life that feels not only successful but sustainable. Finding alignment doesn't always mean you stop working hard. Sometimes it means you're working just as hard but finally in the right direction. You might still be busy, still putting in long hours, still facing setbacks and solving problems, but your why becomes solid, your direction becomes rooted. You stop second-guessing every move because you're no longer chasing someone else's version of success. That self-trust becomes fuel. It allows you to keep showing up, even when it's hard, without feeling like you're losing yourself in the process. The challenge is that we've been conditioned to believe that slowing down to check for alignment is a form of weakness, that pausing to ask deeper questions is indulgent or unnecessary, but those pauses are where the real power lies. When you stop to check in with yourself, when you ask, is this mine? Is this true? Is this still right for me? You create the space to pivot before you veer too far off course. You create the opportunity to recalibrate before your life becomes unrecognizable. You build something rooted instead of something reactionary. Sometimes alignment means saying no to things that once excited you. Sometimes it means disappointing others because you're finally choosing yourself. Sometimes it means walking away from opportunities that pay well but cost too much of your soul. These decisions aren't always easy, and they don't always make sense to other people, but they are the decisions that protect your energy, your joy, your direction. And if you're not protecting those things, then what exactly are you building? Hustle is praised because it's visible. Alignment is quiet. It doesn't always look impressive from the outside. It often requires you to slow down when everyone else is speeding up, to simplify when others are complicating, to trust your own rhythm instead of matching the pace of the world around you. But the outcomes it creates are deeper, more meaningful, more connected to who you actually are. And in the long run, that matters more than any short-term applause. You might feel pressure to keep pushing, to stay in motion, to prove that you're doing enough. But you owe it to yourself to pause and ask, is this the direction I want my life to move in? Not just where I'm working, but why. Not just what I'm building, but how it feels to build it. Are you chasing someone else's idea of success? Or are you creating from your own truth? Are you sprinting through your days, or are you anchored in your values? These aren't soft questions. They are structural ones. Because the answers shape the foundation you're standing on. You can build a life through hustle and still feel empty. Or you can build a life through alignment and feel whole. Even before the big milestones arrive. The process will still require discipline. It will still ask you to stretch, to risk, to show up when it's hard. But you'll know why you're doing it. You'll know it's yours. And that knowing will carry you further than any external push ever could. There is no prize for suffering through a path that was never meant for you. There is no glory in grinding your way toward a destination that doesn't feel like home. Choose alignment. Again and again, even if it's slower, even if it's quieter, even if it means letting go of what looked good on paper. Because at the end of the day, what matters most is not how hard you worked, but how honestly you lived. Chapter 12. When it starts working, let it. There's an unexpected tension that arises when things finally begin to work. After seasons of struggle, doubt, rebuilding, and effort, you may find yourself entering a space where life begins to move in your favor. Doors open, the right people show up. The weight you've been carrying starts to lift. What you once only hoped for starts to materialize in front of you, and yet, instead of feeling pure relief or celebration, something strange can happen. You resist it, you question it, you brace for it to fall apart. Instead of receiving it fully, you begin to sabotage it consciously or unconsciously, because something in you doesn't quite believe it's safe to have what you've been asking for. This moment is crucial because it reveals how deeply you've internalized struggle as your normal state. And if you're not aware of it, you can end up rejecting the very progress you've been working so hard to create. It's not that you don't want things to work, it's that you become so accustomed to things being hard that ease feels unfamiliar, even threatening. Your nervous system has been conditioned to navigate chaos, to anticipate disappointment, to always be on guard, so when life begins to flow, it can trigger discomfort instead of comfort. You may begin to wait for the other shoe to drop. You may convince yourself it's too good to be true. You may start picking apart the good things that are happening, looking for flaws, loopholes, or hidden consequences. This is not because you are ungrateful or negative. It's because your body is trying to protect you based on outdated programming. The work here is not just to build a life that works, but to learn how to receive it without sabotage when it finally arrives. Letting things work requires trust. Not just trust in the process, but trust in yourself to hold good things. It requires believing that you don't have to suffer first in order to deserve joy, that you don't need to be hypervigilant to keep what's flowing, that you are allowed to feel safe in success. This trust is built gradually, through presence, by staying grounded when life feels good instead of detaching or deflecting, by breathing into your wins, not just rushing past them, by letting yourself be seen enjoying what you've built even if others don't understand it. And most importantly, by realizing that good things do not always come with strings attached. Sometimes they're just the natural outcome of your alignment, your effort, and your growth. There's a subtle form of self-sabotage that shows up when you haven't yet healed the parts of you that only know how to survive. You start creating problems where none exist. You stir up drama, pick fights, neglect your boundaries, or procrastinate on the next step, not because you don't know what to do, but because doing it would mean acknowledging that the tide has turned. And if you've spent years fighting to stay afloat, calm waters can feel suspicious. But this is exactly when you need to pause and recenter, to remind yourself that ease is not the enemy, that healing means learning how to be in peace without immediately disrupting it, that you can trust yourself to thrive without abandoning the skills you built in survival mode. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is to receive what you once prayed for, to let the moment be real, to let yourself enjoy the growth, the clarity, the expansion, without undercutting it with guilt or fear. But you cannot build a thriving life if you are constantly preparing for it to fall apart. You cannot sustain abundance if you treat it as temporary or accidental. The energy you bring into your success becomes part of its foundation. So choose presence, choose gratitude, choose openness. Not because it guarantees permanence, but because it allows you to fully live in what's real right now. This chapter of your life may not be perfect. It may still have loose ends and unknowns. But if things are beginning to work, if something is shifting, opening, moving, you are allowed to lean into that. You are allowed to breathe easier. You are allowed to stop bracing for impact and start building from stability. That shift begins inside you, in the way you speak to yourself, in the way you hold your body, in the way you interact with the parts of your life that are finally reflecting the energy you've been putting in. Letting things work also means not shrinking just because it's unfamiliar. When you're used to managing crisis, being in flow can make you feel like you're slacking. You might look for ways to complicate things just to recreate the sense of intensity you've equated with purpose. But growth does not have to be dramatic to be valid. Sometimes growth is silent. Sometimes it looks like a life that doesn't constantly demand repair. Sometimes it's just the absence of chaos. Let that be enough. Let that be worth celebrating. You don't need to downplay your progress. You don't need to explain away your wins. You don't need to make yourself small to fit people who are still committed to struggle. There is enough room for everyone to rise, and your light doesn't dim anyone else's. In fact, your ability to receive what's working without guilt can be a blueprint for others. It can remind them that ease is not selfish, that thriving is not betrayal, that it is possible to be both grateful for the journey and fully present in the reward. Letting things work also means allowing the systems and support you've built to do their job, delegating, releasing control, trusting that you don't have to micromanage everything in order for it to be successful. This is where sustainability is born, not in constant oversight, but in clear systems powered by trust. Letting go is not giving up. It's a vote of confidence in what you've created. It's saying, I've done the work, and now I let it breathe. I let it grow without gripping it with fear. It might feel uncomfortable at first. It might feel like you're losing your edge, but you're not. You're finding a new one. One that isn't sharpened by scarcity or urgency, but by clarity, presence, and trust. One that allows you to lead from a centered place, to create from overflow, to live in alignment with who you've become. That is what it means to let things work, not to assume the journey is over, but to allow yourself to enjoy the part where it finally feels like movement in the right direction. When it starts working, let it. Don't resist, don't backpedal, don't question the timing, let it. Let yourself be someone who doesn't just hope for good things, but receives them. Someone who doesn't just build success, but lives in it, not with fear, not with guilt, but with full presence and gratitude. Chapter 13. Overflow requires open hands. There is a difference between receiving enough to survive and receiving enough to overflow. Survival gives you just what you need to get by, just enough energy, just enough money, just enough clarity to keep moving through the day. It's the version of life where you're constantly calculating, conserving, protecting, and making sure nothing slips through your fingers. Overflow, on the other hand, is not about excess, it's about fullness. It's about operating from a place where what you have is more than enough, not because your life is perfect, but because you are no longer gripping it so tightly. Overflow doesn't come from hoarding, it comes from openness. It flows through people who have learned that holding on too tightly often blocks the very abundance they're trying to keep. We often mistake control for safety. We think that if we can just manage everything, our schedules, our money, our relationships, our image, we'll finally feel secure. But control isn't the same thing as peace. Control is rigid, reactive, and based on fear. It's about restriction, limitation, and the constant need to stay one step ahead of disappointment. Peace, on the other hand, is fluid. It requires trust. It invites you to open your hands, to let go of the death grip you have on outcomes, and to believe that more can come not because you force it, but because you are ready to hold it with ease. Living in overflow starts with a shift in posture. It starts when you stop managing your life like a crisis and begin treating it like a garden. Not everything needs to be defended, not every moment needs to be optimized, not every resource needs to be stretched to the breaking point. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is release your grasp on what you're trying to control and open yourself to the flow of what's already on its way to you. But that's hard to do when you've been taught that more only comes through struggle, that generosity is a risk, that receiving is suspicious, that letting go means losing everything. These beliefs don't just block abundance, they exhaust you. They keep you living in a perpetual state of readiness for things to fall apart. And that posture over time prevents you from stepping into overflow. You cannot receive with clenched fists. You cannot welcome new energy while clinging to everything that no longer serves you. This doesn't mean you throw caution to the wind. It means you begin to ask yourself, am I holding this because it's still aligned, or because I'm afraid to let it go? That question applies to everything. jobs, relationships, routines, identities. Overflow comes when you clear the space to receive it, when you let go of what's just enough, so you can step into what's fully aligned. And that can be terrifying, especially when you've only known safety through control. But nothing transformative grows in a space that's already full of fear. One of the most courageous things you can do is to stop managing your life from a place of scarcity, to stop making decisions only based on what you think will protect you, to begin imagining what could happen if you trusted that more was on the way, not because you demanded it, but because you finally stopped resisting it. This isn't about manifesting fantasies, it's about building capacity. The truth is, many people don't receive more because they haven't created space for it. They want more love, but haven't healed the wounds that keep them guarded. They want more opportunity, but are still operating from beliefs that tell them they're not worthy. They want to be seen, but are terrified of what will be exposed. Overflow is not a matter of luck. It's a matter of readiness, and readiness is often a matter of openness. You don't have to be perfect to be open. You don't need to have everything figured out. But you do have to stop assuming that loss is inevitable. You do have to stop preparing for disappointment in every decision. You do have to release the narrative that tells you things can only work up to a certain point before they collapse. Those stories may have once protected you, but they are now limiting you. Overflow is not something you force. It's something you allow. And that allowance starts in your body, your breath, your attention, your willingness to sit in the unknown without flinching. To live in overflow means you're willing to circulate what you've been given, your energy, your wisdom, your love, your time. It doesn't mean depleting yourself to serve others. It means knowing that giving and receiving are not separate. They are two ends of the same cycle. The more you hold on to things in fear, the more you disrupt the flow. But when you trust that giving from a place of wholeness creates space for even more to return, you stop clinging, you stop hoarding, you stop approaching your life like a closed system, and you begin to experience a rhythm that feels natural, sustainable, and generous. This applies to creativity, relationships, opportunities, everything. You don't have to chase what's meant for you. You simply have to prepare space for it. You have to become someone who knows how to live in ease without guilt. Someone who doesn't just talk about abundance, but practices it by trusting their own enoughness. Someone who gives freely, receives humbly, and trusts the process, even when it moves slower than expected. This is how overflow becomes your new normal, not because you're constantly winning in obvious ways, but because you are no longer shrinking in fear. You are no longer making room only for what you can control. You are open to what's greater. Letting life work is about more than just solving your problems. It's about expanding your capacity to receive joy, connection, peace, and yes, abundance. But to do that, you must first let go of the belief that more means risk, that ease means weakness, that generosity leaves you empty. What if the opposite were true? What if your greatest strength was your softness? What if your most aligned choices were the ones you made from trust, not tension? What if the life you want isn't waiting on a better plan, but simply on your open hands? When it starts to come, don't brace. Don't block. Don't minimize it with phrases like, "I'm just lucky," or "it won't last." Receive it. Breathe it in. Say thank you. Make room. Live in a way that affirms your readiness. Overflow is not a fluke. It is the outcome of presence, alignment, and release. It is the fruit of trusting the deeper rhythm of your life, one that doesn't move on fear, but on faith. One that isn't built through clenched fists, but through hands wide open. Chapter 14. Breakthroughs aren't always loud. We expect breakthroughs to announce themselves. We imagine the turning point of our story to feel cinematic, sudden, dramatic, impossible to miss. We picture that moment of transformation like a spotlight flipping on, illuminating everything we once didn't understand, washing away doubt with instant clarity. But most of the time, that's not how it happens. Most breakthroughs don't arrive like explosions. They slip in through the side door. They feel like stillness, like subtle shifts, like moments you might not notice until days or weeks later when you look back and realize something has changed. And if you're not paying attention, you might dismiss them. You might overlook their significance. You might keep waiting for a louder sign, unaware that what you've been asking for is already unfolding in the quiet corners of your life. It begins when we finally choose rest without guilt, when we tell the truth in a room where we used to hide, when we stop needing other people's approval to feel safe in our own direction. These are not loud victories, but they are real ones. They are the kind of moments that build something unshakable, because they come from within. You can be in the middle of a breakthrough and not even know it because you're still comparing it to someone else's highlight reel. You might miss the gravity of your own healing because it didn't look like the dramatic story arcs you've seen online or on stage. But breakthroughs aren't about performance. They're about alignment. They're about the internal shifts that start to influence your external world. And while the results might show up later in more visible ways, the transformation almost always begins in quiet, private, deeply personal decision. There's a specific kind of strength required to honor small breakthroughs. It's the strength of attention, of stillness, of choosing not to overlook your own progress just because it didn't come with fanfare. When you start paying attention to the way you're changing, not in big leaps but in small pivots, you begin to realize that growth is always happening. You begin to develop a reverence for process instead of only celebrating outcome, and that changes how you move through life. You stop rushing to get somewhere and start showing up for where you are. You stop believing that value is tied to volume. You begin to trust the power of subtle shifts, slow progress, and quiet resilience. Breakthroughs are often born in ordinary moments, in conversations where you say what you really mean, in choosing silence instead of reaction, in the breath you take before making a choice you used to make impulsively, in the boundaries you hold, the compassion you extend, the belief you don't abandon. These moments won't always be witnessed. They may not be celebrated, but they matter. They're the moments that change your trajectory, not with a bang, but with a whisper. Not with chaos, but with calm. They're the moments when you realize you've changed, not because you planned to, but because you couldn't go back to who you were before. One of the most common mistakes people make is to assume that if their life doesn't look drastically different, then they haven't grown. But growth doesn't always change your scenery, it changes your posture. It changes how you hold yourself in the same rooms, how you speak in the same conversations, how you respond to the same triggers. That's what real transformation looks like. Not always changing your circumstances, but changing your relationship to them. When you start showing up differently in the places that once diminish you, that is a breakthrough. When you no longer abandon yourself to fit into spaces that don't respect you, that is a breakthrough. When you stop performing and start living in your truth, even quietly, that is a breakthrough. Learning to recognize these quiet shifts as valid and powerful is part of building an abundant mindset. Because abundance isn't just about big wins or public success, it's about presence. It's about recognizing that life is already responding to you, even if the results haven't fully shown up yet. It's about celebrating alignment before achievement. It's about choosing to believe that the small moments of integrity and clarity are not preparation for your real life. They are your real life. They are the evidence that your internal world is transforming, and your external world will follow in time and in ways that are often unexpected. There's nothing wrong with big moments. There's nothing wrong with loud victories. But if you condition yourself to only recognize those, you miss the richness of the journey. You miss the sacredness of the quiet spaces, the slow mornings, the private wins. You miss the beauty of the steps that no one claps for, but that create the very foundation of everything you're building. Real breakthroughs often look like healing that no one sees, like courage that no one understands, like softness where there used to be armor, like staying when you used to run, or walking away when you used to stay too long. These are not scenes that make for dramatic stories, but they are the turning points of your life. When you stop needing your breakthroughs to be loud, you also stop outsourcing your validation. You start owning your path. You begin to honor the way you change, even when it's subtle, even when it's quiet, even when no one else notices. And in doing so, you reclaim a kind of power that no applause can give you. You become someone who is no longer waiting to be seen in order to feel real. You become someone who knows their own growth without needing it to be obvious. And that kind of self-trust, that kind of grounded awareness, makes your life stronger, softer, and more sustainable. So the next time something shifts inside you, don't rush past it just because it wasn't loud. Don't dismiss it just because no one else noticed. Breathe into it. Acknowledge it. Let it matter. Because these are the moments that build a life that works, not one built on performance, but one rooted in presence, peace, and the quiet kind of progress that truly lasts. Chapter 15. Success that feels like you. It's possible to build a version of success that doesn't belong to you. To chase what looks impressive, to pursue what is widely praised, to spend years constructing a life that technically works but quietly wears you down. Many people reach goals only to find themselves numb, confused, or exhausted, because what they created never truly reflected who they were. It reflected what they thought they needed to be in order to matter. It reflected expectations, assumptions, and comparisons. The world clapped, but something inside remained quiet, untouched, unseen. This is the kind of success that steals your energy, the kind that may satisfy others but slowly disconnects you from yourself. And it is not the only option, because there is another kind of success, one that feels like you, one that reflects your values, honors your pace, supports your peace, and makes space for your full self to exist without apology. Success that feels like you is not measured only in numbers, titles, or public recognition. It's measured in the quiet moments when you can breathe deeply, in the mornings when you're not rushing through your life, in the conversations where you're fully present, in the projects that challenge and inspire you in equal measure. It's the kind of success that aligns with your nervous system instead of attacking it. It's the feeling of being rooted in your own definition of enoughness. And building it requires clarity, honesty, and the courage to break away from what no longer fits. There is nothing wrong with ambition. There is nothing wrong with setting goals or wanting more, but what you want must be your own. Otherwise, no amount of achievement will ever satisfy you. You'll keep reaching new levels only to find the same emptiness waiting at the top. You'll keep striving without ever arriving. Success, when it's not aligned, is a moving target. It asks for more and more, but gives back less and less, until one day you wake up and realize you're living in a story that has no joy in it. Not because you're not capable, but because the story was never really yours. To create a version of success that feels like you have to first unlearn what success was supposed to mean. You have to challenge the narratives that told you what you needed to look like, earn, or accomplish in order to be valid. You have to peel back the layers of identity that were built to impress or protect and ask yourself, what matters to me, really? This isn't a one-time question. It's a continual return to your core, a checking in, a reorientation, because the world will constantly offer you its version of success. It will tempt you with comparisons, with fast wins, with shiny outcomes that don't require depth. And you will have to decide again and again to choose what is real over what is easy to explain. This version of success may not always be understood by others. It might not fit neatly into someone else's timeline or formula. It might look slower, it might feel softer, but it will be yours, and because it's yours, It will feel sustainable. It will nourish you instead of depleting you. It will invite growth without requiring self-abandonment. It will demand effort, yes, but it won't require that you become someone else in the process. Success that feels like you honors your whole life, not just the part that earns or performs. It honors your relationships, your body, your energy, your time, your values. It asks you to stop fragmenting yourself in order to fit into narrow definitions. It asks you to consider what enough looks like for you, not someday, but now, and then to build from that definition, brick by brick, day by day, without needing the outside world to validate what you're creating. To do this, you have to get honest about the parts of your current life that don't align. Where are you performing instead of living? Where are you chasing someone else's dream? Where are you exhausted not from effort but from pretending? These questions are not easy, but they are essential. Because clarity doesn't come from adding more, it comes from subtracting what doesn't belong. It comes from being brave enough to tell yourself the truth about what no longer fits, even if it once did. It comes from realizing that success without self is just a performance, and no amount of applause can replace the feeling of living from your center. As you define success for yourself, expect discomfort. People may not understand. They may question your choices. They may see you walking away from what they still aspire to and assume you're giving up. But you're not giving up. You're choosing differently. You're choosing presence over pressure, integrity over image, connection over comparison. And in the long run, that kind of success lasts longer, feels better, and creates a life that actually works, not just on the outside, but at every level. You don't have to prove yourself through exhaustion. You don't have to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's blueprint. You don't have to wait until it makes sense to everyone else before you pivot toward something that feels more honest. You are allowed to succeed on your own terms. You are allowed to win without losing your joy. You are allowed to define what thriving means for you and then live in that definition fully and unapologetically. And here's the beautiful thing. When you build success that feels like you don't have to chase it. You become it. Your life becomes the evidence. Your energy becomes the proof. You stop needing external markers because your inner world starts reflecting peace, purpose, and presence. You stop asking if you're doing enough and start trusting that you are enough, that your path is valid, that your pace is wise, that your process is holy. Success that feels like you doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be flashy. But it will be true. It will be nourishing. It will be something you can carry with pride because it wasn't handed to you by someone else's expectations. It was built by you, for you, and with your whole self in mind. So pause and ask, what would it look like to build a life that doesn't just work, but works for me? What would I have to stop chasing? What would I finally allow? What would I choose if no one was watching, measuring, or judging? These questions aren't just philosophical, they're directional. They point you toward the kind of success that actually sustains you. And in a world full of noise, choosing that kind of clarity is one of the most revolutionary things you can do. Chapter 16. You're the proof that it works. At some point, you stop looking outside yourself for permission. You stop waiting for validation, applause, or confirmation from others. You stop needing someone to point to your life and say, now it counts. Instead, you begin to understand that your very existence, your presence, your growth, your decision to keep going, is the proof that something real is happening. You are the evidence. You are the case study. You are the data that shows this journey is working, even if no one else sees it yet. Even if the results are still forming, even if the external success hasn't fully arrived, the fact that you're still here, still reaching, still asking better questions, still trying again, that's the proof. You don't need to become someone else to be worthy of the life you're building. You need to recognize that who you are now is not the prelude. It's part of the story, a powerful part, and it's enough. We are conditioned to believe that success must look a certain way to be valid, that it must be measurable, monetized, visible to others. But some of the most important victories will never be posted or praised. They will happen in the quiet of your daily life, in how you show up for yourself, in how you refuse to give up on your own evolution, in how you speak to yourself in the mirror, in how you respond when things go wrong, in how you keep your heart open even after it's been broken. These moments won't always feel significant, but they are. They are the threads that weave a life of depth, intention, and resilience. They are the signs that what you're doing, how you're growing, is working. The work of trusting your process is the work of remembering your own authority. It's realizing that no one else gets to decide when your life is meaningful. No one else gets to tell you when your progress is real. You are the one who knows how far you've come. You are the one who knows what you've overcome. You are the one who gets to decide when something matters. And if you keep waiting for the world to catch up, you may end up delaying your own arrival. Because the truth is, there may not be a standing ovation. There may not be a moment when everyone suddenly sees your worth, but you're not here to be seen. You're here to live. You're here to move in truth. You're here to create from wholeness, not from need. The most powerful validation is internal. It's the kind that doesn't waver when things slow down. It doesn't disappear when you hit a rough patch. It's rooted. It's earned through presence, not perfection. It comes from showing up consistently, even when it's inconvenient. It comes from telling yourself the truth, even when the truth requires change. It comes from living with integrity, not for image. And when you start to live that way, you begin to realize that you don't need to prove anything to anyone. You've already proven it to yourself. And that's what lasts. You are already carrying the lessons. You are already applying what you've learned. Maybe you're not where you want to be yet, but you're moving with more wisdom. Maybe you still doubt yourself some days, but you're no longer ruled by that doubt. Maybe the circumstances haven't fully shifted, but your perspective has. That's not failure. That's not waiting. That's momentum. That's movement. And it's enough. You are enough. Not because you've arrived, but because you are engaged, because you are in it, because you're doing the real work, the kind that transforms from the inside out. When you look back, you'll realize the most important milestones weren't always the biggest. They were the quiet pivots, the moments you chose to stay when you used to run, the mornings you showed up for your routine even when it felt pointless, the boundaries you held when it would have been easier to fold, the way you kept returning to your vision even after setbacks, even after doubt, even after things fell apart. These moments stack. They accumulate. And over time they create a life that feels whole, not flawless, but real. Not always easy, but aligned. You're the proof that the slow path works, that the honest path works, that the path of inner alignment, daily presence, and consistent faith works. You're the proof that you don't have to have everything figured out to keep moving, that you can be healing and creating at the same time, that you can be vulnerable and still show up strong, that you can have bad days and still be headed in the right direction. You're the proof that growth is not a straight line, but a series of choices made with intention, choices that compound, choices that change you. There is a different kind of confidence that grows from this kind of path. It's quieter than ego. It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to dominate a room. It lives in your body. It shows up in your breath, in your posture, in the calm way you carry yourself. It's the confidence of someone who knows they don't need to chase, prove, or perform. It's the confidence of someone who trusts their own unfolding. And that confidence is unshakable because it's built on experience, not image. You don't need someone to certify your progress. You don't need every detail of your life to be impressive before it can be meaningful. You're the living proof that growth doesn't require perfect timing or perfect conditions, that alignment doesn't require a stage, that transformation doesn't need to be loud to be real. You are what it looks like. When someone chooses to live in integrity, even when it's inconvenient, you are what it looks like when someone decides their peace is more important than their appearance. You are what it looks like when someone refuses to give up on themselves, even when it would be easier to settle. Let your life reflect that truth. Let it be the quiet, consistent reminder that you don't need to chase miracles. You are one. You don't need to become extraordinary. You already are simply by continuing to show up. And you don't need to wait for some final, polished version of yourself before you believe that you're on the right track. This version of you is valid. This chapter counts. This season is sacred. You're the proof that things can work from right here, not just someday, not just when it looks good, but now, in the mess, in the motion, in the truth of who you are becoming. You are the evidence that real change is possible, that deep alignment is possible, that a life built on presence, purpose, and peace is not just a dream, it's a reality in motion, and it's yours. Chapter 17, The Life That Keeps Becoming. There comes a time when the work shifts, when the effort is no longer about proving something or fixing what's broken, when the striving begins to soften and is replaced by something more grounded, more sustainable, something more whole. It's not that you stop growing, dreaming, or challenging yourself. It's that you stop gripping so tightly to the belief that everything must be hard to be real. You begin to understand that life is not a test to pass, but an experience to embody. That your value isn't something to chase down through endless goals, but something to return to again and again, as the foundation beneath all the becoming. And this is what creates a life that doesn't just work once or in one area or under one set of conditions, but a life that keeps becoming, evolving, deepening, expanding in rhythm with who you are and what you truly desire. The journey you've taken to reach this point has not been linear. There have been seasons of doubt, of stillness, of chaos and recalibration. There have been moments when things fell apart and you weren't sure they would come back together. There have been pivots, endings, unexpected starts, and yet here you are. Not just surviving it all, but rising through it. And not because the world finally got easier, but because you got clearer, stronger, softer in all the right places, more honest with yourself, more aware of what actually matters to you, and most importantly, more willing to live in a way that reflects that truth fully, daily, without apology. The idea that your life should one day reach a finish line, some final polished version of success or identity, is another illusion you're allowed to release now. You are not a project to complete. You are not a puzzle to be solved. You are a dynamic, living, breathing process of unfolding, and every version of you is allowed. Every stage is worthy. You're not here to graduate from growth. You're here to stay in relationship with it, to keep refining what works, to keep letting go of what doesn't, to continue meeting yourself with compassion through each transition. Because the life that works is not static. It is not defined by a single outcome. It is created through your ability to stay connected to what's true, even as what's true evolves. This kind of life doesn't always look extraordinary from the outside. It may not follow the timelines or milestones that others expect, but it will feel like yours. And that feeling, that grounded, authentic, unshakable connection to your own life, is worth more than any accolade. It's worth more than validation. It's worth more than a perfect plan, because it allows you to move through uncertainty with trust. It gives you something solid to stand on, even when everything else is in flux. It reminds you that you don't need to know every step to keep walking. You only need to stay present enough to take the next one with intention. Let this be the chapter where you stop waiting for everything to settle before you call it success. Let this be the chapter where you stop trying to figure out the entire map before you start moving. Let this be the moment you decide to live in your becoming, to honor it, to enjoy it, and to trust it, not as a means to an end, but as a worthy and sacred experience in and of itself. Because this is the kind of life that keeps giving. It grows with you, it adapts to your needs, it supports you as you stretch, as you rest, as you change your mind, as you find your way. This is a life built on alignment, not appearance, a life rooted in integrity, not image, a life that allows for softness, for mistakes, for redefinition. It doesn't punish you for being human. It doesn't force you to choose between success and peace. It invites both, it holds both, it makes space for both. And as you continue to walk this path, remember that you are never starting from scratch. Even in your lowest moments, even when things unravel, you're starting from wisdom, from experience, from a deeper understanding of yourself and your worth. That's what makes you resilient. Not that you never fall, but that you rise with greater clarity each time. You don't need to be perfect to be powerful. You don't need to arrive to be meaningful. You are not waiting to become someone better. You are living as someone already enough. You are the through line of your own story, the constant, the core. And the more you live in alignment with that core, the more the rest of your life begins to organize itself around that clarity. Things don't become effortless, but they do become more natural, more connected, more reflective of who you actually are. And if at times you lose that connection, if you drift, if you get pulled into old patterns or forget what matters for a while, that's okay too, because this is a life that welcomes returns. It welcomes re-entry, it welcomes new understanding. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to come back to yourself without shame. You are allowed to rewrite the rules as you learn, as you grow, as you discover what else is possible. The life that keeps becoming is not glamorous every day. It is not always easy to explain, but it is deeply alive. It is the kind of life that breathes with you, that meets you, that grows as you grow. And when things begin to feel uncertain again, and they will, you'll know that you don't need to panic or pause or question everything. You'll know how to listen. You'll know how to shift. You'll know how to trust the soil you've already cultivated beneath your feet. You won't always need a plan. You'll just need to stay open, to stay willing, to keep moving in the direction of what feels real. And that direction might not be a straight line, but it will be true. It will lead you into deeper connection, greater peace, and more honest expressions of who you are. Let this be the reminder you carry forward. You're not here to reach a final version. You're here to live a life that keeps becoming rich, messy, alive, aligned, and deeply, fully yours.